My name is Sarah Godley. Thank you all for taking time to join this wonderful conversation we have ahead of us. Just a couple of quick reminders before I turn it over to Dr. Bruder Stapleton, who will be leading our discussion. We do have a couple opportunities for audience response, and so would ask that you use the Q&A to submit your questions and submit answers to those. And we look forward to a great discussion. I will provide a link in the chat for our vignettes as well. So if you would like to read the vignettes as they're being read aloud, we will also have an opportunity for you to do that. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bruder Stapleton. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Sarah. Next slide. Well, welcome to all that are joining us today. So I'm Bruder Stapleton. I'm formerly the chair of pediatrics at the University of Washington. And for those of you that are new to our group, I'd like to introduce us, the Child Health Advisory Council. We're a diverse group of former academic division chiefs, chairs, and deans who, after leaving our leadership positions, really continue to aspire to contribute to the success of academic pediatrics. We were formed in 2021 as an advisory council by CareerPhysician and CareerPhysician CEO Wesley Milliken. CareerPhysician is a pediatric executive search and leadership development company and has the vision of harnessing one's generation's wisdom and experience for the benefit of the next. This mission of continuing to contribute to academic leadership in pediatrics really attracted us to form and join the Child Health Advisory Council as a leadership advisory group to CareerPhysician and to its clients. Collectively, all of us on this council agree that recruiting successful leaders, faculty, and executives is really the foundation of a leader's legacy and a leader's ultimate success. Recruiting is also a leadership competency for obvious competitive reasons that's not typically addressed by the academic community in some of our development programs. Collectively, we've learned many lessons, good and bad, during our leadership positions about the process of recruiting. We no longer have local recruiting responsibilities or conflicts, and so we hope that from our experiences, we can offer you advice that will help you successfully build and sustain faculty talent. Today's discussion of the recruiting process comes from our collective experiences. We believe that the lessons that we're trying to highlight today are relevant for both in-person and virtual recruiting processes. So this is the first of a series of recruiting webinars that we hope to hold, and we look forward to any feedback we can get from you concerning how we might better address, or if the format we've chosen to use vignettes is a good one for you. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Christine Gleason and Dr. Craig Hillmeyer, who are going to present as you will see, troublesome visit.
Thank you, Bruder. So our vignette is titled A Failed Recruitment Visit. So Dr. M, Professor and Chief of Pediatric Endocrinology at X University, was invited to visit Y University to interview on site for the Pediatric Department Chair position. The search committee was chaired by Dr. L, Chair of Internal Medicine. Prior to her visit, Dr. M had several informal Zoom interviews. The last one was with Dr. L, who'd invited her for this on-site visit. During that call, Dr. M requested meetings with the Pediatric Endocrinology Chief and the Director of the Diabetes Research Institute. Dr. M arrived at the airport the evening prior to her visit. A car service had been arranged to transport her to the hotel, but the driver was late and she waited over an hour at baggage claim. She texted Dr. L's admin assistant, but had no response. When she arrived at the hotel, she received her final visit itinerary. She noted that her first day began at 7 a.m. with a breakfast meeting with the search committee, followed by 45-minute interviews throughout the day until 6 p.m., with 15 minutes between interviews for her to be escorted to the next interviewer's location. She was disappointed to find that neither of the people she'd requested meetings with were included in her visit. The search committee breakfast meeting was informal, with some committee members asking similar questions and others, including Dr. M herself, no questions at all. Her first interview was with an internal candidate who believed he was the heir apparent and had essentially been promised the position. The second interview was with the interim chair, who strongly criticized the dean and the previous chair. In the afternoon, she met with the pulmonary chief, who said he was leaving after not being given tenure. At the end of the day, she had an hour-long tour of the children's hospital provided by the chief pediatric resident, who, at 6 p.m., drove her back to her hotel. At the hotel, she had a few minutes to drop off her things in her room before she was texted by Dr. L, who said he was waiting to drive her to the restaurant for dinner. Upon arrival at the restaurant, she was seated at one end of a table for 12, where she could only communicate with the people seated on either side of her. After dinner, she was driven back to the hotel by Dr. L, whom she'd noticed having several drinks over the course of the dinner. Back in her hotel room, she was exhausted, and after her reviewing her itinerary for the next day, she decided to withdraw from the search. Craig?
Well, thank you very much, Chris, and I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. We certainly, as a group, have enjoyed putting this vignette together, and I think we're going to have I hope we're going to have a very interesting discussion of hopefully some things that don't seem all that familiar to you, but I'm sure some of us will have recognized from recruitments that either we've put together or recruitments that we've been involved in from the standpoint of being recruited. So first of all, I'd like to ask people and the webinar participants to take a moment to use the Q&A function that you have and try to identify the most impactful missteps made during this recruitment visit. Now, we won't take very long doing this, maybe just a half a minute or so, but if you could use the Q&A function down at the bottom of the Zoom screen and send in some of the most impactful missteps that you feel were made during this recruitment visit. I'll give you just a few more seconds to do that. And we're gonna, since we've had an opportunity to discuss this at the Child Health Advisory Council, I'm gonna be asking several people from the council to comment on some specific missteps that have been made. So maybe Chris, if you wanna start off and talk about some of the issues associated with the coordination of the visit and logistics that went on here and some of the things that might have been done better.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And I'm sure the participants are going to add many things to this, but my comments will address, well, what strategies can help mitigate some of these really impactful missteps that led to this person withdrawing from the search. So in this scenario, it's not clear to either the stakeholders, the recruiting stakeholders, or the candidate herself, who owns the visit. And who has overseen or oversees and is accountable for the planning of it, the preparations? Who operationalizes the on-site logistics? Who's the host or the contact for the candidate? I'm sure all of us have been recruited for various things, and you kind of want to know when things fall through the cracks. Who is it that you turn to, or when there are missteps? Who is the person who you think or should be accountable or owning the visit? Now, sometimes that actually has to do with who actually is the decision maker in the process, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So an ideal strategy is, I think, some or probably all of you have pieces of this strategy, but for that coordination, the logistics of the visit. So depending on maybe the size of your department or your university, your school of medicine, an ideal thing would be to have sort of a, for lack of a better term, an office of faculty recruitment, or an experienced or seasoned sort of recruitment coordinator. You know, what would that person or persons or office do? Well, and again, you all probably have pieces of this, but one thing that I think we've all found very helpful is to develop certain guidelines or templates, a roadmap that's common to all on-site, and we're talking here primarily on-site recruitment visits, but of course you have to coordinate it with what's been done electronically by Zoom or whatever before or after the visit, sometimes even during the visit, as has been the case with COVID. So it's talking about having common materials that are available for the candidate, community, schools, real estate, and so forth. Pre-visit planning, what are common things that should be done or that everyone agrees could be done, again, individualized for your division, department, or research institute. What about transportation, hotels, amenities? Is there a gift package, something of that nature that is standard for, Pittsburgh or Seattle or Houston, Texas? What about the dinner, the obligatory, well, sorry, I didn't mean the dinner or dinners. Where? Are there specific places? How many? What should the seating arrangements be like? What about alcohol? Addressing that before the candidate comes, not after the candidate's sort of surprised or feels that he or she can't we call an Uber? And what about the interview logistics, the length of the interviews? How are they spread throughout the day? What about time out for the candidate? Should there be one room that they all come to so that there's no need? What about the tour? Who does it? I think actually having the chief pediatric resident can actually be really great. You learn different things there. So anyway, I'll end my comments there and turn it back over to Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that was really very helpful. I'd like to ask maybe Bob Sawin to maybe give a few comments about perhaps the choice and maybe even the preparation of some of the interviewers, as that can sometimes be a pretty sticky issue to deal with. Bob, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Obviously some selection of the people interviewing is important, but in this scenario, one of the things that's highlighted is you've got potential exposure to some malcontents, and you're not going to be able to avoid that entirely. But I think one thing that can minimize the impact of that is having whoever, as Chris said, whoever owns the process, maybe clarifying up front. You're potentially going to meet with some people who are going to have a different perspective or a jaundiced perspective. I hope you'll understand that, or even being forthright about saying, there are some issues in the department. You're going to chat with some people that'll help expose those. And then similarly, having that person maybe do a wrap up at the end, I think is really helpful. The other thing that I found really beneficial in some of these interviews is to have predetermined questions, and ideally questions that are of the holistic type, that are intended to be more open-ended and get the candidate to talk about their personality and how they deal with things more than their accomplishments that are evident on the CV. And the advantage of those predetermined questions is you can then, for example, at this breakfast meeting, the various search committee members can ask individual questions. And those questions also have a benefit, I think, of potentially avoiding or minimizing risk of race or gender bias, that if you just have poorly defined questions. And then lastly, I think the evaluation forms, I think a lot of times they're fairly typical and not unique to the specific search. I really think the committee should spend some time saying, what are the values that we're looking for in this candidate? And the evaluation form should reflect those values, so that people, when they're interviewing them, have a focus and a purpose. So those are some of the things that I think have been beneficial in some of the searches I've been involved with.
Good. Thank you very much, Bob. That's very helpful, I think. I was wondering if Valerie has in our conversations, Valerie's had some really good sort of principles or guidelines that I think are very helpful in putting together the whole interview process. And Valerie, if you might want to share those with us now.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you to all the participants that are here, and it's been great fun for the panel to kind of work through these vignettes. For all of you participating today, these vignettes are real. These are not something that we made up. So I don't think you could say much that went well with this visit. So we had a lot of discussion. Should we give you, what do you do on the first visit? What do you do on the second visit? And the more we talked as a panel, we realized we really want to focus with this vignette on the first real impression. And so we came up with the 3 F's. And if you take nothing away, you take away the 3 F's. So number 1 is first impression. There is nothing more important than the candidate's first impression of you and your institution. Hopefully it'll be good, but if it's bad, especially with a senior recruitment like this one, someone that's a sitting division chief that's looking at a chair job, they have a vast array of individuals that look to them for advice. And believe me, if that was their experience at this institution, your institution, the impact of that bad visit is going to reverberate for you and your institution for many years to come. So the first F is first impression. You must be committed, whatever the recruitment level is, that every single candidate that visit is going to leave your institution and you, whether they want the opportunity or not, with a good first impression. The second is no failures. Chris and Bob gave you a lot of great little suggestions for making sure there's no failure on the visit. How many of us have embarked on a recruitment and we failed to reach out to every single person who would touch the candidate or the candidates? You must do that as part of your work to prepare for that first impression. Everybody should understand why they're interviewing, what you need them to focus on, and why they were selected, and what you're hoping will come from this recruitment. And that allows you to address some of the very serious issues that Bob raised. When you're having individuals who might not be completely happy with certain things, hopefully they can put forward, set aside their issues and deal with the candidate and the opportunities for them. And the third is follow-up. So many recruitments have a great first impression and then bang, there's no follow-up for weeks or months. This is incredibly important for you to put your efforts on, because it should be timely and it should be thoughtful. You should want to know what you want to learn from the candidate and what you can hopefully extract out of the candidate that they didn't get on that very first visit, whether it's a Zoom interaction or an on-campus visit. And most importantly, that follow-up, you must make a plan with the candidate. What is going to be the plan for your re-engagement of them as the process goes on? Give them as much information as you possibly can so that they can understand the timing of your process and why they might not hear from you for a couple of months. And then what is going to be the way that you keep them engaged? All of that needs to be part of your follow-up. So the 3 F's: first impression, no failures, and follow-up.
Very good. Thank you very much, Valerie. That was very helpful, I think. Bruder, I know you've got some thoughts on how one might go about assessing the evaluation of the candidates' interviews and the importance of that process and how to derive, that information.
Craig and my colleagues have really hit it on the head, nail in the head, that is. I found, as I started my career and as a leader and chair, that people often really didn't take the time to plan the visit, to think about how important the organization of the visit was. And now more than ever, there's a limited pool of applicants. It's extremely expensive. And you may not have but one chance to have an interaction that really allows you to recruit a really talented person that might be a great fit. But what a shame if they aren't, don't come away with the good impression that Valerie talked about. And I think one of the things that really helps is, Chris said, having a coordinator, but also having common materials. And so that, and get buy-in from the faculty as you create those materials. We used for every recruit, a standard template for the itinerary that gave the candidate a visual of the person they were talking to, a headshot, and his or her background so they could click on and get a brief bio of the person who's interviewing them. And people really appreciated that because it gave them an opportunity to think about how they might ask the person. The second thing is we had a one-page evaluation sheet that was accompanied the itinerary for the person who's doing the interview. And one of the first things is, what's the person being interviewed for? You know, people say, well, is this a physician scientist or a clinician educator or more a clinician? And boy, it's really discouraging for a recruit who comes in, who the person saying, well, what are you here for? You know, how disappointing that is. So on the evaluation form, you had, of course, the candidate's name and your name, but you said, this is the position. And as they've been prepared for the visit. And secondly, then, as Bob said, you have criteria that you want to come away with that can be assessed by multiple people. So you have more than one viewpoint, and you have specific things you're thinking about. And so having the search committee say, on our evaluation form, we want to really assess this person's commitment to the community, commitment to diversity, their leadership skills, and we had a Likert scale, and we always gave them an opportunity for people to comment on what they thought the strengths and weaknesses were, and whether the candidate should be considered or not. And so having all that in a one-page evaluation form online that they could fill out and return, really after the visit, you have this information online because people were asked to do it within a day of the interview. And you then could give some feedback to the candidate, and also have a real good sense of, as you're communicating, as Valerie said, the level of interest that you have in sustaining this person as a candidate. So I think consistency in engaging the faculty and creating the evaluation form really helps them to understand what they and you are looking for in the person that who's going to be their colleague. And I think that's a really important aspect. So I'll turn it back to you, Craig.
Well, thanks, Bruder. And we have a couple more minutes. And I guess at this point, if people, participants in the webinar, the audience, would like to put forward in the Q&A section any large missteps that they saw happen during this vignette, or maybe some other missteps that they've had questions about, this might be a good time to put those forward, because we might have time to talk about one or two of those. So, along the lines that both Bruder and Valerie were talking about, I think that a missed opportunity sometimes is when you're working with a candidate prior to the in-person visit, is finding out who they want to talk with. Do they know anyone at that institution? And why they might want to talk with those people, because that can sometimes give you an insight as to their maturity and their appropriateness for the position. It also, if those people that they've asked to talk with can't meet with them, I think it's really important to try and explain why they can't meet with them. If they're at a meeting, they're busy, they're in clinic that day, they can't get out, whatever. But the people that they identify are really important, and maybe they can make it just to dinner. They can't do an interview process. Try to make it so that they can actually see those people that they've actually brought up and mentioned to you. So,
Craig, yeah. They could also have a phone call follow-up.
And they could have a phone call follow-up, absolutely, because those are people that mean something special to them. And it doesn't even have to be someone in the department. It just maybe someone that they've had interactions with previously in their professional career at another institution. And that sometimes is very important to them. Sarah, did anything come across that you think we might want to look at before we go to the next vignette?
Craig, we didn't have any additional questions, but I do see that Dr. Sawin had his hand up with a comment.
Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, I just wondered if any of the panelists or anyone in the audience had any experience with actually training, that is institutions training people on how to recruit or how to interview. I've read some stuff about holistic interviews and behavioral interview questions, and I think some institutions out there are actually putting at least faculty leaders through such training. I just wondered if any of you had any experience with that.
Sure sounds like a good idea to me. I have not seen that. I don't know. Has anyone else? Danielle, I saw you shaking your head, and Bruder. Yeah.
Danielle, did you experience?
Yes. So behavioral interviews, yes. I mean, when I was chair at one of my institutions, we certainly reviewed the whole concept of behavioral interviews. And we tried to standardize it so that we would ask each of the interviewees the same set of questions to see their ability to navigate through conflicts, to present things fairly. So yeah, and training from the divisions of medical education, because these are clinician educators that are really focused on the theoretical basis of medical education of adult learners, is actually quite insightful and gives some tools to the interviewers. So I found that very helpful.
I mean, there's a modest amount in the literature about the use of these tools in choosing residents and choosing medical students, but not a lot about that I could find about faculty recruitments. And as Bruder said in the introduction, this is probably among the most important things that we have to do as leaders. So I think it's intriguing that there isn't as much training as maybe there ought to be.
Yeah, I tried, and Chris will remember, I tried to sort of say, let's step out our comfort zone. And I brought in she was a sister of one of our chief residents who was a recruiter for Microsoft. And boy, you talk about a recruitment process that's different, but it really created some new thinking. And you know, we have developed our systems, at least to start, but based on our experience. And there's a whole world out there that does recruiting, so I think, you know, try to think outside the box a little bit. And Amazon, I keep saying Amazon, excuse me, Microsoft trains, they have the same people interview every candidate for a position, and they train and they communicate during the day. If they haven't gotten a good sense of one aspects that they're looking for, they text one of the persons that is interviewing after them and say, I wasn't really sure on this. Would you mind
That's good.
exploring? And you know, there's a lot for us to learn outside of medicine in terms of structuring recruits.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, but maybe Valerie, did you have one or two comments? And then Sarah, you can finish it up. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to comment on something in the chat from Eric Werner, who was asking us, are there any better evaluation forms? And he makes the comment, Eric, you make a good comment that you found your conversation amongst interview participants much more informative. I think that's very insightful. And while I agree with Bob that, you know, certainly the type of behavioral questioning that he refers to is well documented in the literature for medical student applicants, residency level applicants. But when you're talking about faculty recruitments, oftentimes the forms don't enable you to get the nuances that people pick up from their years of experience interviewing candidates. So having that one-on-one informal conversation, I think, can be as helpful, if not more helpful, than an open-ended question on the evaluation form that just says, let me know what else you thought.
The other thing that might be helpful on an evaluation form that I've actually seen sometimes is, what is something about this interviewee that might concern you? And then what is their most positive aspect? You know, that sometimes gets away from everything is good, because everyone has something that concerns them about everything. So that's so Sarah, I think we're probably ready to maybe go on, Bruder, to the next vignette. Okay.
Well, that's great. So thanks for all the input in the chat and the questions and answers. And I hope this discussion was useful, and we're anxious to hear if you have other things about this you'd like us to talk about. The next vignette is about finding out what you need to know to anchor a recruitment. And Valerie's going to lead this, I think, with Bob Salin.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and read the vignette for folks real quickly. So you've spent the better part of 2 years trying to recruit a pediatric nephrology division director. Today, you're going to be meeting with your lead candidate, a mid-career, highly respected physician investigator from a smaller Midwest program. And you're really excited about the last 2 visits. They've gone well. The faculty in the division and the department have uniformly reported that this is the one. At the conclusion of your interview, where you learn from the candidate that they think this is their dream position, and the package that we've outlined will be more than fit her needs and the division's needs, and really excited to get started. You then ask, well, is there anything more that I need to know or address to finalize your recruitment? The candidate looks relieved and thanks you for that question. And you then learn that they're concerned that the partner a botanist by training, who had just secured a new position with the botanical gardens in the current city where they reside. The candidate lets you know that they're very worried that in accepting this opportunity with you, there might be a negative impact on their partner's career. So I'll turn it over to Valerie.
Great. So again, this is a real vignette. You could say a lot of things about, boy, it took a long time for this information to come out, which hopefully we'll get to. What we wanted to ask you all right now is to use that Q&A function again. And Sarah is going to collect what your first impressions are from just hearing that vignette. What would be the first reaction that you might take in this situation? And just like the previous vignette, we're going to collect your comments and ideas. And if we have time, we're going to go through them today. But if not, more likely, we're going to include some of this information in the materials that we will send you after today's webinar. So I'm going to turn to Danielle LaRocque Arena for our first discussion topic, and that is what tactics can be used to uncover this or similar personal dilemmas earlier in the recruitment process. And Danielle, I hope you'll touch on a lot of areas, including maybe some of the legal things that we are not supposed to get into when we're interviewing candidates.
Sure, thank you. So first of all, I want to echo that the previous vignette really displayed a number of the points that I'm going to be making. So one of the things that I found very useful is to clearly understand what the visit is about. And the way to do that at whatever level you're recruiting, division chief, chair, dean, senior VP, president, et cetera, is that someone, as been stated before, someone has to be in charge, but not only in charge of what the object of the recruitment is, but also a point person, and those may not be the same people. And then there needs to be a charge to the committee. And let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say you are recruiting you are a chair and recruiting a division director. Then there needs to be a real charge to the committee of interviewers who are in the same room. And I would ask legal counsel, HR, and if you're engaging a search firm, a representative for the search firm, to actually be present in that so that you could say the things, for example, that were already pointed out. What are we recruiting for? Is it a physician scientist? Is it a clinician educator? So there's some commonality and standardization of how you're approaching that. The reason that's important is for the second point, which is other than a charge to the committee, you want to set the tone so that there are the following qualities that have been pointed out already. Respect. There are many, many situations, such as the one we just said, where there isn't a communication to the candidate that they're being respectful, that the institution is being respectful of their wishes in thinking about this position. Thoughtfulness, that there's a real commitment and genuine commitment to some of the things that Bruder pointed out. Bruder specifically said a commitment, for example, to diversity, community. It may be to development of a translational, division or something. That there is a real genuine commitment. It comes through very quickly when folks see that they're not the focus of your attention. You may have a number of applicants, but you're not really looking for them. And so I think being genuine so that there's a sense of fairness, equity, and a focus on values and qualifications. Now, we get into the sticky area of the legal implications of various questions, right? Which is what Valerie has asked me to comment on. So I'm going to refer you to some references, but let's say generally, there are things both at the federal level that you can't ask, okay? And state-specific questions that are added to that. And this is all pre-employment. Once a person is on board, HR will ask a whole series of questions that are legally permissible, okay? So that's not what we're talking about, okay? We're talking about pre-employment, the interview. And those I'm going to read out to you, but you can find them in any website. Okay, so the federal protected classes are race, color, religion, and creed, national origin or ancestry, sex, which relates to gender, pregnancy, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And if you're not clear on the difference between sex and gender, there is a lot of literature now about, those topics, because that's evolved over the last decade. Age, physical and mental disability, veteran status, genetic information, and citizenship. Those are the federal ones. Now, I'm in New York, and you may be in various states. I urge you to reach out to whatever website. For example, in New York, it was the Division of Human Rights, because various states have actually decided that they're going to include other protected classes. And when I compared the federal one in New York to the protected classes, the federal one to New York, three things popped out. One is a protected class is domestic violence and victim status. So you may enter into a conversation and that topic comes up. So knowing that, you may prepare with legal counsel or with HR on how you really can't delve into those areas either directly or indirectly, okay? Prior arrest or conviction record. In New York, we no longer can ask that as a prerequisite for an interview process, and retaliation from unlawful discriminatory practices. So if you want to delve into the kinds of things by this vignette, I think that there are a couple things that become a little bit tricky. If those areas come up, the usual recommendation is to elicit information only that's relevant to the application's job, okay? So really to focus on the science, to focus on commitment to, if you have a clear statement on commitment to community and diversity, how does that interface with the science or the area that the interviewer is interviewing for? That's a legitimate way to integrate some of those things. I'll send it back to Valerie. I know that's a complicated subject. One warning, none of us is an attorney or legal counsel, so don't give legal advice. The other is that even if you are an attorney, we have lots of docs who are attorneys, unless you are operating with your university hat or college of medicine hat, you can't delve into those areas either, but be aware of it and ask tons of questions before the interview. I hope that clarifies a pretty complex issue, but feeling welcomed is probably one of the most important things to take away. Even if you can't answer, I can't delve into that right now, but we'll make sure to get you a question. We're really interested in your thoughts about whatever the topic is.
So before we let you go, Danielle, this information came up, after this candidate had presumably a number of interviews.
Right.
And it came up at kind of the closing of the deal. When you reflect on how that chair was able to extract that information with their question, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think I'm a little surprised that it came up only then, because in the course of conversation, and by the way, the interview is any conversation. It need not be the sit-down conversation. So I'm a little surprised. So I think posing that question early on, what are the things as you go through this interview process, please let us know the things that are critical to your assessment of how this planned move might serve your needs professionally and otherwise. So posing that question earlier on, I think, would be one reaction to this. And I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's a way to anticipate. And I think one of the things that was pointed out is you could prepare a packet, right? So you have other universities that are around, you have, almost a GIS map of what other colleges, universities, you have housing information, you have school information, and you standardize that, okay? So careful to not to have information only for particular applicants. That may create the impression of bias. Whatever you give in the package, go to all and say, oh, you have a liberal arts college. Well, my husband happens, or my partner, or, happens to be in this field. will emerge and say, oh, that's very interesting. There may be things that they want to seek out. But I think you want to be clear that those questions are anticipated.
That's great. I think when we were as a panel discussing this, we also thought that perhaps this chair had established a good enough relationship with the candidate. And they asked a very open-ended question at the end, was there anything else I need to know? And that was enough to let the comfort level of some of the issues with the spouse come out. But anyway, all great comments. So now
One
what we
other
thought
thing, Valerie, it may be that you bookend those things so that who's the first person that the person meets with and who's the last person. So the first person can set the tone and get pose that general question and then bookend it with closing the visit. So we make sure we've touched on all points.
Great point. Great point. So what we thought we might do now, since we've got a lot of experience on the panel at different levels in leadership in the organization through the medical school, we thought we'd ask the question, what creative solutions could be explored in this particular vignette or in others where there's a dual career difficulty that needs to be addressed at both the chair level, the division chief level, and perhaps even at the university level, as Danielle was just commenting on. So Arnie, can we turn to you, because you've got years of experience with this, and maybe even make some comments about research, no research, really any area in the recruitment process that could be an issue with the dual.
Thank you, Valerie, for implying that I'm old.
Seasoned.
I think the key to this vignette and often to recruitments is planning, is thinking ahead. And that means making the inquiries that are appropriate early, as well as being aware during the interview process, as occurred here, of new information and being able to respond to it. So recruitments are just that. They're about trying to attract a candidate to your institution. You want to be positive. While you're learning about them, obviously they're learning about you, but you want to be positive in every way that you can be. So in the planning process, I think the appropriate question that Danielle suggested is, what are the personal, family, or professional issues that are going to be important to you, the candidate, in this recruitment process? Early on, trying to establish what some of those issues are, with the goal, obviously, of being able to plan ahead and address them before or during the interviews. And these family issues. So I would add a fourth F to Valerie's three Fs. Family, these recruitments are about family, whether it's a traditional family, a partnership, whether there are children involved or not, whether there might be elders involved. Some of my own recruitments were very much influenced by my in-laws and whether or not we could create a situation that was positive for them. So learning about those up front, not at the end, I think is critical. So this is about family. And those issues obviously depend upon age, as well as the composition of the family. And they can become very specific. One of my interesting recruits here in Cincinnati had to do with religious education. That was the single most important issue for that recruitment. Was there the appropriate school for the children? And because we knew that, we were able to adjust to it, create a visit that included experience at that site. And that was ended up with a very positive outcome. So learning about those and preparing for them up front, to me, are really crucial issues. So that's the fourth F, family. And I think despite the legal restrictions, we really must inquire about these kinds of issues early on and address them. So
I go ahead, Arnie. Sorry for interrupting.
the fifth F that I want to talk about is flexibility. So I think we have to be flexible in recruitments. Obviously, you want to make it fair and reasonably standardized, and having templates for evaluation is good, but flexibility to be able to adapt to the candidate's situation is really crucial. And I talked about some examples of that, and there are many others. So being part of the community, knowing the connection. So, you know, maybe the spouse or partner is an attorney. Well, it helps to know attorneys and people who know that community, and therefore what might be available, depending upon the type of law that the partner or spouse does. So flexibility in the approach to the recruitment, to me, is absolutely critical. So I think I would also want to emphasize something that Valerie said at the beginning. You're going to interview for most positions somewhere between 10 and 5 recruits, meaning that 4 or 9 of them are not going to get the job. And they are going to carry back their impression of your capabilities and your institution to their own institution, to their own faculty, and to the pediatric community. How many times has you, as participants, for example, heard, well, I went to institution Z and I would never go back there. That's a horrible thing to have happen. Or, well, I went to institution Z, and even though I'm not going there, it's a great place and I'd love to have the next job that's available there. So these are the kinds of impressions that I think do make a huge difference in our very small community. How many nephrologists are there, Bruder? I don't know. Probably 3 that, well, no, I'm just, but it's a very small community and the word gets around. So family is important, flexibility is important, and first impressions, I agree, are very important. Thank you, Valerie.
All right, Arnie, as always, great comments. And now, Craig, can we turn to you? And can you give us some of your thoughts on approaches and considerations outside the box when you learn something about a dual that you just have to try and find an answer to?
You're muted.
I think that's a situation where we're gonna have to put a lot of emphasis on the last F that Arnie talked about, and that's that flexibility. In this particular instance, in which I think it's a botanist that is the partner of the particular candidate. You know, I have found that when you look at recruits, first, the easiest way to deal with these sorts of recruits is obviously within your own division or department, if indeed you have the resources to help that recruitment. And if that's not the case, the easiest thing is to look outside into the larger institution. Most of the academic departments of pediatrics are within large institutions that you may find have resources available to assist partner recruitments. And I would look throughout the university, and really if it's a really important recruit, and this is a more senior recruit, you really want to talk to, if you're a division chief, talk to the chair. If you're a chair, talk to the dean and find out what resources might exist. The last institution where I was dean, the university actually had a very vigorous program in which they would pay half of the salary of the partner for 3 years if there was a school out or a department outside of the primary recruiting department that was recruiting, and that was very much a help. Now, you still may have to be flexible, and there were instances, and I can remember 1 or 2 instances in which we said, okay, well, the university is going to pay half that salary, and you know what, the College of Medicine is going to pay 1/4 of the salary, so it only costs the hosting department for the secondary partner 1/4 of the salary. for 3 years to recruit that individual. And that sort of flexibility makes it much more likely to be able to find a partner physician. But I think if the institution or the larger institution doesn't have those sort of resources, I think then you need to be flexible and look into the community. Arnie talked about the situation of legal, but I would look at not-for-profits. I would look at, for-profits, and, really, if it's an important enough recruit, really extend those antennas out into the community to find out where those options might take place. And you know what? Even if the recruit doesn't work out, it lets the person you're recruiting feel much better about the recruitment that you tried, and leaves them with a much better attitude that, yes, this place really did care and really did try to make it possible. So flexibility is really important. And you may have to use some of your resources to pay part of the salary. I think Valerie talked about a situation we were talking, right, Valerie, where you use some resources from your department to actually help co-fund a position outside the university for a period of years. And then oftentimes that turns into a fully funded position. So flexibility is key to making that successful. But even if it's not successful, it does that important thing that Arnie talked about, where you really, that person leaves the recruitment process feeling like they feel good about the institution. And that down the road can have a lot of very positive influences. So I think those are the thoughts I would have on that, Valerie. Yeah.
So I'll just see if any of the panelists have any additional small snippets of comments, and then I'll turn it back to Bruder for you to, take us to the end of the session.
Valerie, the thing I would add, the more time people have, the more flexible they get. And, I really, when you're talking about a spouse or partner who's going to require a big package, or, we worked with a physician whose spouse was a neurophysicist or a nuclear physicist and only worked at power plants. And our client, there wasn't a power plant, nuclear power plant within 5 states, So my point is, it may also be a healthy alternative to admit early in the process that it's not going to work, versus, you're doing the candidate a favor by not wasting their time. And you think about the investment in faculty time and resources that occurs when you go into it with hope. But so I think that's just something else that, I would add to that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's critical. We haven't brought up costs yet, but the amount of money that's spent on recruiting when it's a failure is very sad. Those are resources that can be put to good use. And there's no point in stringing someone along when or you have a feeling like you can work miracles. Like, no, I don't think so. That's not usually the case. So yeah, great comment, Wes.
Valerie, do we have time for a question from the chat?
We actually do. My clock says 7 minutes, Sarah. So if you give us a thumbs up, yeah.
Yeah, we just had the question, and I'll reframe it. And I know recruiting firms and such are paid to do what they do, but the question really centered around getting your faculty to engage in the recruitment process, recruitment dinners, and all that goes into the recruitment process. I mean, there's very little incentive from at least a remuneration standpoint for faculty as it relates to that. But the question centered around how have you communicated with faculty and really kind of created this faculty talent culture within the department or the division that at least provides some positive motivation for faculty to engage and help out in the process.
So
Arnie?
did you want?
Yeah, I would just say that there are a couple of things, both small and large. Good food and wine are a real incentive for most of my faculty, because they can't afford, I don't let them be able to afford that on their own. But I think the large issue really is that such recruitments are the key to the future for the department. When you consider that, the next division chief is going to be there for 5 or 10 or more years. The next chair hopefully will be around for 5 or 10 years. the quality of the recruitment determines the future of the department or the division. And what can be more important to a faculty member than improving the institution? So sending that message to me loud and clear early on, not just about a specific recruitment, but about all recruitments. Every recruitment should be, if possible, an upgrade, so that the institution keeps getting better.
Thank you, Arnie.
Yeah, I would have to say, Wesley, that it's not been a problem getting people in my experience to participate. Because, I said that, the faculty's ability to help determine their colleagues is one of the unique aspects that still remains in academics. and so, having the opportunity to make things better through a recruitment has always been pretty appealing. And I think the important thing to not discourage them is, one, communicate with people about the recruitment and do it frequently. And secondly, get them engaged in the materials and the discussion about what kind of person is being, would be a good fit. So, and then making things easy for them, so that you get them the material they need to interview the candidates. I mean, if somebody has to struggle or, they're not clear about where they're supposed to be or what they're supposed to ask and stuff, then they don't want to, that wears people down. But helping people through your organization and your communication, I've never had a problem.
I just
Yeah,
wonder,
I would
Oh, sorry,
also,
Danielle, go ahead.
yeah, no, I would also add that a commitment to looking at a broad applicant pool is really important. So that if you're looking to the future and you're looking at innovation or you're looking at areas that you want to build within your college or university, then having a broad applicant pool that engages the thoughts of the current faculty is really critical, because they know you're looking at the future. And then matching the interviewee and the interviewer so that their interest, and one last point, community tours are really important. You can talk about communities, but if you have a community tour where the applicant actually gets to see the community and questions evolve organically about that, then that's very helpful in the recruitment process and showing a love of your community, whether it's university town or whatever.
More great comments. There was a question that came to me from Rohit about Zooms. Is Zoom going to be part of the future of all this recruiting, or will it go away during the pandemic? And Wesley, I hate to point to you, but you've got a national perspective, and we've talked about this quite a bit in some of our discussions in preparing for this panel, that things have really changed. Would you make some comments that way?
Sure. I do think Zoom's here to stay. I think it's created a level of efficiency in the recruiting processes that's better than phone calls, not as good as on-site visits, but I think search committees, institutions are able to get, and even candidates are able to get at least some sense of a chemistry with a group of people that facilitates them moving on to the next level. I mean, it will create challenges because we're seeing, that on-site interaction is coming later in the process than it historically had. And you see a lot of institutions getting down to their 2 or 3 finalists before anybody comes to campus. And, to me, that increases the threshold for failure if your visits aren't focused on the candidate and their needs. So I don't see any of our clients, some are in states that are hosting on-site visits currently, and other clients are, still all virtual, so it's all over the board. But I do think the Zoom or the other virtual platforms have created a real nice thing, not only for committee processes, but in the interviews y'all referenced that didn't get scheduled in the original vignette. I mean, to be in an office and have a 30-minute Zoom with the candidate you couldn't get scheduled is a way to, still accomplish the same thing. So I think it's an incredible tool. It's a cost savings tool, but you have to be even more on top of your game from a candidate engagement standpoint, because it also can isolate the candidate and make an institution look non-responsive if you're not on top of that. So.
Okay, with that, Bruder, I think we only have a minute left.
Well, I will first of all thank the panelists and thank our colleagues who've joined us, and we hope that you found this interesting and thought-provoking at times, and will join us for future webinars. Sarah, is there a slide with the next webinars? And they are scheduled, the first one on the 8th of June and one following that. And we're going to talk next time about looking for diverse talent and ensuring that diverse talent recruitment occurs. And then continue talking about faculty talent culture. Wesley, do you have any last comments you'd like to make?
No, Bruder, I really just want to thank the council. I've seen a lot of leaders in pediatrics come and go over the years, and I know you and I have talked, but the collective passion to try to harness the wisdom and experience of one generation and pass it on to the next, to me is a great cause. And from our perspective, I just want to thank you and all the other founding council members for committing to that vision and that process. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.